The life of Bela was a mess, a mess. His life was also more myth and legend than truth, likely because the facts were very, very thin. Very, very little was known of him, though the evidence of his crimes is probably one of the best documented sets of evidence in Europe for any serial killer prior to the beginning of World War II. There are a few issues that muddy the waters around the real story of Bela. First, he operated before World War I, during the sunset days of yellow journalism. Second, because war was raging when discovery of his crimes was made, there was very little contemporaneous reporting of it outside of Hungary, and inside of Hungary, it would be junior reporters first sent to cover the story, as the most senior were committed to war reporting. Third, he was from Hungary, which itself was in uproar as the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was nigh, the emperor had died, and a new empress was to be coronated. There was rioting building for women to gain the vote. There was significant famine. It was the slaying of their own Archduke Ferdinand that began this war, after all, and the Cossacks were causing all manner of shenanigans in the empire. There were more than one attempt to assassinate the Hungarian leader, Premier Tiza, who doesn't want to make any reforms that would prevent mass starvation. And Germany is demanding all of Hungary's excess food staples, even though there was mass famine. So it was pretty rough times. And finally, reports coming out of Hungary were often tainted with poor translation, racism, and xenophobia. So, to try to get to the most accurate telling of Bela, we have given the most weight to Hungarian researchers, to what remains of historical police records, and to contemporaneous Hungarian reports. Honestly, it's such a compelling story that we don't understand why yellow journalists would even bother to embellish it. Most Hungarian sources agree that Bela died in a prisoner of war camp in Serbia on February the 5th, 1915. When he died, he was just a Hungarian soldier who had enlisted in World War I. Nothing more, nothing less. Prior to the war, Bela was a tin maker in Csinkóda, which is a neighborhood of Budapest, where he moved when he was 17 or 18 years old. He opened a tinsmith shop near where HEV station is today, together with an apothecary's assistant, Janos Nagy. Now, he's been described by the few who knew him as educated, hardworking, but also frivolous and fun-loving. He wasn't a bad-looking man. This is the only known image of him. He had a lot of lady visitors, but few would notice that at least 7 of them arrived at his house and never left. Bela was sent off to war in 1914, never to return home. He had been leasing part of a building on Kossuth Street from a landowner named Martin Krasinski. The building needed some work by 1916, having no one there to take care of it. So on May 9th, 1916, Krasinski sent workers over to get on with repairs. And he shows up himself. The building also contained a pharmacy, which faced the street, a spice shop, and the Civic Casino. Krasinski and the pharmacy owner were looking for some plastering material to do the repair work. And they figured out that there had to be some, that sort of thing, in the small woodshed used by the tinsmith, and well, Bela wasn't there to ask. They removed the lock from the door of the shed, and inside they found 4 large soldered tin barrels. Believing the barrels would contain either items taken from the pharmacy, according to one source, or fuel, which could be sold at high prices during the war in Pest, the pharmacist decides to open one of them. In that barrel was the body of a long decomposed woman who had thick golden blonde hair. It was then that the pharmacist and Krasinski would remember that there were 3 more soldered barrels in the courtyard of the property, tucked up next to a pigsty. They summoned police authorities who opened the remaining barrels. Now, there were 7 female victims in the barrels, all somewhat decomposing. Their stated decomposition had been slowed by containment in the barrels and by the fact that they had been essentially pickled in wood alcohol. Why? We don't know. We can't ask Bela about it. Even if he did not die in Serbia, he is long dead by now. In this photo, you see the 7 barrels. Number 1 has been opened, but the remainder are waiting on police to open them. The authorities took a remarkably detailed set of photographs documenting their evidence in this case, but onto who is in the barrels and what more police were able to learn. So in barrel number 1 is a girl, Catalin Varga, who worked as a server in a Cincotta restaurant. Bela had proposed to her after a very short courtship, and she disappeared in 1912 and was never seen again. Next in barrel 2 was Bela's common-law partner, Julia Pesadic, and mother of his 2 children. She was last seen sometime in 1906 when she lived with Bela in Rottenbiller Street, which means that barrel was likely moved from location to location. In barrel 3 was the body of a woman, Maria Toth, 26, who was a cook from Pulse. Now, she went missing in 1906, and her stolen jewelry would later be found. We'll get to that. In barrel 4, there's an unnamed woman who may be Esther Feketa, but that was never confirmed. In barrel 5, Margaret Toth, who was a 37-year-old coffee distributor. She went missing in 1906 after a proposal by Bela. He stole 900 crowns from her. Her mother immediately suspected Bela in the disappearance, but when she went to police to file a complaint against him, well, they ignored her. In barrel 6 is Catalin Kukan, who was 27. Bela stole 1,600 crowns from her. When people came looking for her, he told them, oh, well, she was pregnant and she went to a village and gave birth, and I never saw her again. In the last barrel is Handler Maria, who was 16. She was a cook. She had only a shirt on, and with her in the barrel was a stillborn baby. Now the senior journalists are called in, along with about 100 police detectives. They searched and thoroughly documented photographs of women, more than 500 love letters contained on postcards, canvas novels, which were otherwise known as murder mystery novels, chemistry manuals. They found jewelry, evidence of stolen money, evidence of other stolen goods. They found evidence that Bela proposed to 174 separate women. To 71 of those women, he promised that he would marry them within weeks of their arrival in Budapest. They found evidence that he had been advertising as an available husband in Budapest newspapers from 1905 through 1914, when he was sent off to war. He narrowed those he actually brought to his house to those whose relatives lived far away or were dead. He usually chose victims older than he was, but not always. People who had migrated to the city from the countryside and who were unhappy with their fates. As reports began coming out in the papers, 60 different families from across Hungary would come forward to ask if their missing women were among the victims. Were there more barrels hidden, undiscovered, at different locations? The Red Cross confirmed after a bounty was issued for Bela that they recorded the death of Bela Kiss of typhus in a prisoner of war camp at Beljevo in Serbia. The body was never identified by Hungarian authorities because typhus is extremely contagious, and normally the body of somebody who died of typhus was dealt with by burying them together in a mass grave that goes unmarked. However, there is no evidence that the Red Cross's record is inaccurate. The police accepted the accuracy of it and closed their files once their documentation was completed. As early as 1916, fictionalized and dramatized stories of Bela Kiss' horror figure began appearing. Plays, songs, and poems would follow, and in the years that followed, sightings of Bela Kiss were made in Budapest, among the French Foreign Legion, and even in New York by a Hungarian journalist, and Hungarians living in an apartment building on 6th Avenue. However, none of these people knew Bela Kiss before the war, and only knew him from the one image published in newspapers, which isn't exactly a great definition. One of the legends was that public autopsies were performed on the 7 known victims in public in a cemetery. That is likely due to poor translations of Hungarian reports. Bodies were publicly removed from their barrels. The twine that bound them was removed, and they were well straightened and placed into coffins. This process was well documented by police and by the media. Once the documentation was completed, the coffins were sealed and the victims were interred together. In later reports, the victims changed. There's a male, it is said, and Bela's second common-law spouse. Authorities dug up nearly the entire neighborhood. No other bodies were ever located, including those of Maria, his second common-law spouse, and any lover she might have taken. All of the contemporaneous reports, all of them, refer only to 7 women. 17 additional women were identified as possible victims. They were missing and had corresponded with Bela at some point, but none of those was ever confirmed to be a victim. Much of the documented evidence was part of a permanent exhibit at the Police History Museum in Budapest. However, the museum was nearly completely destroyed during World War II, and we lost much of the evidence. There you have it. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and you want to see more, please click the subscribe button and hit those notifications so that you don't miss any uploads. We appreciate you. Thanks.